and welcome to another Seeing Double video. I'm Garden Girl Jen Gallagher, and today I wanted to just play with some supplies that I have had for a while and wanted to use up. So this is a great use up your stash. I'm going to be using some elements that work well for a boy layout because I'm doing a layout about my son today. So as we're moving through the collections, I want you to think about things that maybe work for boys. I'm also going to bring in some patterns from collections that kind of have a vintage vibe to them. So I think a masculine layout always translates well with vintage items. So this is from a basic gray album piece, and I loved the nice diagonal lines on the top, and I actually liked these holes that were punched, and so I'm going to use that as a foundational piece on my layout. If I buy things for mini albums and then I don't end up using them for the mini album, then I typically try and find another way to use them on my layout. This particular pattern paper is from the Times and Seasons 2 collection from Echo Park Paper, and we're going to trim it down just a little bit. And when I trim things down, I try to center the design. So you'll notice that there is a vertical line that runs through each of these pieces of paper. And so I always mark off a place where it will still keep a centered design so that when I cut it, you can see there is a equidistance from each line on both sides. So that is a designer tip, is to center your designs when cutting. We'll go ahead and mount this here. And we're going to go ahead and cover these die cut arrow pieces. Now I used my silhouette machine and I cut a large die cut shape. This is actually a shape. The words were already welded together and it says Silly Boy. And you can find a lot of different words in the Silhouette store, or you can use the Silhouette software to weld together any true type fonts that you like. And we're going to tuck it just behind the black pattern paper. And before we adhere all the way, I have two tags. Now, one is cut from pattern paper and one is an actual tag from American Crafts. And to create two tags, I simply placed one tag on pattern paper that I wanted to use, and I cut around it, and then I punched out the circle. So you can create your own tags, and I'm actually only going to use the top part of these tags. So I'm going to trim them off. And this one actually has a vintage typewriter on the bottom, but it's pink, so that doesn't work with what I want to do. So I'm going to layer a couple of tags together. And you'll notice that I just don't worry about the bottom parts. I'm perfectly happy to alter any product that I have to fit the design that I want to create. So don't be afraid to cut and change up embellishments or tags or pattern paper. You probably are already doing it with things like mist, so don't be afraid to do it with your embellishments. You can even cut through chipboard sometimes if it's not too thick. This is a charming mini flare. I love these new mini flares from Studio Calico, and I've played with it a little bit, so it's not quite as sticky as it was when I first got it. So I'm adding an extra little glue dot, and that will be the dot for my eye in the word silly. And then I also have a leftover tag. It's from a camping collection from Pebbles, and I want to add this to my title. So I'm going to untie it, and then I'm going to retie it to one of these letters. So again, using up some of my tags and things, you can still read the title. And then for me, I like to add a little bit of adhesive. That is an option for you, but then I can get the placement exactly where I want. I have some journaling that I have printed onto craft cardstock, and this is an old 2-piece font. The fonts are no longer available. If you like the look of this font, it is called Task List, and you can get the same look by using kind of a sans serif font in all caps. And it's a great masculine looking font. Now I want to bring in some green. I am using a couple of pattern papers from the Hey Kid collection by Basic Gray, and I love that they have a green, orange, and kind of black and tans mixed in, which is a fun masculine scheme. And this is a solid 6x6 pattern paper, so I'm trying to mix in some 6x6 papers, some mini album sheets, and some pattern papers. It's towards the end of the year, so I'm looking to use up as much of my stuff as I can so that I can buy new things since CHA is right around the corner. And I've created 2 pennant shapes, and I'm just kind of building some layers here. And then to the bottom, between these 2 different pennants, I'm going to add some washi tape. And I wanted to bring in some gray, but I want to use a tone-on-tone pattern because I don't want it to detract from the rest of the album, or rather the rest of the layout. So I'll just peel off some of this tape. If you have tape that doesn't come in a thin layer like this, you can actually cut down your tape until you get the exact shape that you want. To the tops of the tags, I have some number paper clips. Paper clips are a great item to add to a tag. Perhaps for a girl tag, you might add a ribbon. For a boy tag, maybe think about a more masculine element such as these paper clips. Then to the bottom of the layout, I'm going to add 2 pieces of 6x6 pattern paper. And this particular number 1 is from Echo Park Paper Times and Seasons collection. And this player tape one is actually from Basic Gray. And you'll notice that Echo Park leaves a little bit of a top to theirs so that they have the hole punch, and Basic Gray does not. You can trim that off, or you can simply tuck it underneath. I'm going to tuck it underneath. And I want it to be almost the same width as this paper at the top. And I'm going to let the 6x6 pattern paper do the work for me. And I am going to, you'll notice I'm not bringing the 2 papers perfectly even at the bottom. That's kind of an unexpected design element, and it mixes it up just a little bit. So one thing that I've seen a lot lately that is fun is they have these fun transparency overlays. These particular ones are from a crepe paper line, and they are a deeper reddish orange than the player tape, and we're going to actually do these, layer these right on top of our photos. And they have a bunch of different ones in the pack. For example, this is another one in the pack, and you can use these right on top of your photos. You can leave your photos as a 4x6 and place them on top, or you can actually cut your photos down to fit these exactly. So let's go ahead and put our photos beneath these transparencies. So what I did is I trimmed a photo so that it was slightly larger than the transparency. Now you could trim the photo to fit just inside. You can trim it so that it's exactly to the edges. It's completely up to you. So there are a few ways that you can add the transparency to the photo. And one way that you can do it is to add adhesive along the dark section so that it doesn't show. Being that it's clear, you will see some different, you will see the adhesive show through rather. So what I'm going to do is I want to bring in some metal. So I am going to actually staple the transparency and the photo directly to my layout. And then we'll add the second photo. And I'm going to add just a teensy bit of adhesive on the right side. Make sure the transparency is straight because I'm going to cover that part with more photos. So we'll overlap that a little bit. And then again, we will add the transparency. Do make sure that if you are adding the transparency that you have enough space to add the staples. Also make sure that the words are upside right. Now, obviously the photos are far enough in that my stapler doesn't reach all the way. So what I like to do is I'll take a foam piece underneath and I'll poke this through, turn the page over, and just like a brad, I will set the staple itself. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I've done one here. I thought you might want to see how I do this. So again, making sure the transparency word is upside right. Place the transparency exactly where you'd like it to be. And then I've opened my stapler. And I go ahead and staple through the paper and the transparencies into a foam core base on the back. you'll notice that the staple is open. So I'll just take a pair of scissors and I will bend those metal pieces onto the back of the page, just like it would if it were really a stapler, that had stapled it through. And this is what it looks like on the front. So again, twice, and then connect them on the back. At this point, I want to add a few embellishments. So the first thing I'm going to add is this camera transparency, also from Basic Gray. And we're going to slightly overlap the tag and the journaling, making sure we don't cover the journaling. You'll notice that I've added a little bit of yellow washi tape to the page. And to bring in some more yellow, I'm going to use this die cut from Jelly Bean Soup. And we'll just add that to the bottom here. And then one of the other die cuts from another company, this is a Fancy Pants die cut, but I liked this black number 5, and it doesn't really have any significance, I just liked it. And then I like to add sequins to my layout, and I try and add them in clusters of 3, so 1, 2, 3. And then again, we'll add them at the top, and I just use some glue dots on the back and add them to the layout. You could also use enamel dots or wood veneer, whatever you want that kind of brings in that blingy look. So here's the layout using a bunch of different vintage collections and kind of masculine themes. Let's go ahead and make a bonus project using some of the same kinds of items that I have here on the layout. So to match the layout, we're going to use a sheet of cardstock that I've cut down and folded in half to create the card base. Then from the Times and Seasons 2 collection, I'm going to use this journaling card, which you can see has that black kind of herringbone pattern on the back. And this is from the Times and Seasons collection. Then to bring in some of that yellow, I'm going to use one of the die cuts from the Jelly Bean Soup die cut collection. And it is a frame, and we want to kind of frame out the ampersand. Then I want to bring in some more of that black pattern paper that I've been using. Just trim it down a little bit. Create a pennant shape like we did the last time with some of the elements. And we'll add this to the bottom of the card. And then on top of that, we're going to use some of that green dot pattern paper that I used to create the tag. And again, we'll cut it into a pennant shape. You could rub the edges of these with brown stamping ink too, if you'd like, just for a little bit more dimension and texture. We'll slightly overlap. I'm just using the same techniques that I used on the layout to help it go quickly. Let's use some of that gray washi tape. And we'll also bring in a little bit of the yellow washi tape. We've created a few layers. This particular little yellow heart is also from the die cut package that has the frame. And this will kind of be our little focal spot. And then I'm going to add another paper clip, and I used paper clips on the last one. This particular one is from Webster's Pages, and this one will not stay without adhering it. So I'm going to actually use the staples like we did the last time and attach it to the card with some staples. So you can see how I'm just adding a few staples, and that brings in that metal element on both sides. Then I want to add a little bit of the orange like I had on the project, the layout project. And so to do that, rather than use other embellishments that I've already used before, I simply took an orange button and I tied it with twine. And we're going to use a glue dot and mount it right in the center of the lens of that camera. And you may need to add a little bit extra glue to the edges so that it sticks, but that brings in a little bit of the orange that you saw before. And then because I like cards with a little bit of bling, I'm going to go ahead and add a few more of those sequins. We'll do that with some glue dots. So you can see some of the elements were the same and some were similar, such as using paper clips was similar, but I didn't use the same ones. But by having my supplies organized so that I have paper clips together or yellow items together, it allows me to quickly and easily create a card. Thank you for joining me for today's Seeing Double project. Be sure to subscribe to the 2Ps YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of these weekly videos. And be sure to visit the website for additional Seeing Double projects.